Alright guys, welcome back to the last part of this introduction series of videos. In this one we are dealing with the latest, Season 4. So in this one I'm going to do things a little bit differently, because this season was a little bit different. I'm going to mix the review of one of the books in with the actual recap. Basically, this season consists almost entirely of stories taken from the new Darkening Sky book. What this is it was an old book that was going to be released for the Dark Ages line by White Wolf, but they never released it. But now that they're doing Vampire 20th Anniversary, they decided to throw it out there. And it's really not very good. Basically, the idea behind it is that there are 5 adventures from each of the main lines: Vampire, Werewolf, Fae, Inquisition, and Mage. And most of these stories are incredibly dull. So what I decided to do was I wanted to, since we're pretty much leaving the Dark Ages, after this there are a lot of long downtimes and we're going to be moving through history pretty quick. So before we left the Dark Ages timeline, I wanted to run some short adventures in the other game lines and just sort of, you know, let the players sort of see some other stuff that's going on in their same universe but with different characters. So I rolled up most of the characters for them and just gave them short little one-shot adventures. Even reading through before I even ran it, the stories read to me as pretty dull, so I usually had some sort of competition involved in the game, and then whoever won it would get more experience points for their regular character. There was just a small EXP prize. Most of the competitions involved in some way dicking over all the other players and somehow being the only one that came out of the story still alive. And really, it did kind of ruin the stories as they were meant to be told, but as they were meant to be told, they're really boring, so I don't mind doing it. It at least made them kind of fun sessions to play in, and we weren't really taking it too seriously. Before we get into that, though, I have been telling a sort of separate chronicle, which is paralleling the main one. I already mentioned before that out of character, pretty much the party has decided to go with the Sabbat when that becomes a thing. So I came up with the idea of kind of having a separate set of characters that would go with the Camarilla and be more... They're almost all Ventrue, so I also wanted to kind of run the Ventrue Chronicles at the same time to sort of juxtapose the two, just to pull them out every once in a while to kind of see how the other half is doing things. But that started with sort of a quick prelude for these Ventrue characters, which I used the adventure Clash of Wills, because their Ventrue characters are in England, as opposed to Eastern Europe. And Clash of Wills is set in England, and I had the book, so I wanted to use it. Once again, because it wasn't the regular characters, we weren't taking this very seriously, which is probably a good thing. This adventure is really kind of dull. It really almost comes across as the sort of adventure that might have taken place at the end of a by-night source book in, like, the early 90s. Sort of like a Milwaukee by night or something like that. And honestly, it's even a little bit lower quality than even those. It really is just kind of boring. Basically, what happened was the characters got contacted by an agent of Mithras and sent to a earl who was about to die, and they really want to get his land. They wanted to go to the king, but the church really wants his land too, so they have to go there and just make sure that the earl ends up willing it to, like, the nobility, not to the church. Although it turns out that really, this isn't even made that clear in the book, but his son is actually kind of controlled by the Bruja, so they kind of figure out they can't just get him to will it to their son, because the church is controlled by the Toreador, and that's what the Ventrue are really worried about, and the players are working for the Ventrue. There's really no option for them not to be working for the Ventrue, which is a negative on any story, really. But the Bruja also control the son, so they can't really have a will to him, so they really just... Basically, what the solution my players came up with was really just, like, kill everyone, leave it in flames, and then if there's no one to inherit anything, then the crown just kind of scoops it up, and Mithras is in control of that. So, that was their solution. Really, the adventure is, like, they go there, find out that the church is, like, forging wills, like, the son forges a will, you know, everyone's just forging wills, and, yeah, it pretty much just ends in a fight. Really, there's not that much that players really get input in. Really, the only way they can get input is really if they do what my players did and just kind of kill everyone. Really, yeah, rather linear. Just kind of short and just overall not that interesting. Nothing actually impressive happens, like nothing to affect the world in general. So, in terms of Clash of Wills, I would say give it a pass, really, unless you're absolutely desperate to run a story set in England and you really don't want to come up with one yourself. Clash of Wills just really is not very good. So, pass on that one. But it did serve as an introduction for their Ventrue characters, and I won't bother doing character introductions because those characters aren't going to be appearing very much. So, on to Darkening Sky. Basically, I told 6 stories all set during the eclipse of 1230, and I kind of adjusted the first story of the Ventrue Chronicles to take place during that time period, too. So, in the Ventrue Chronicles, York is sort of the city where it's based in, and it's under attack by a lot of other forces, like Mithras wants to take it over, and they ended up kind of leaving the plot proper just to side up with Mithras and help him take over. That one, you know, it's really just kind of pretty basic political machinations, and like I said, I'm not going to go too deep into it because the Ventrue characters aren't that important to what's going on overall. But, I guess I'll get a little bit more into the Ventrue Chronicles a little bit later, since this is really only the first part of it. The story itself isn't that interesting. The only really interesting part of the Chronicle book in general is that it tells stories from different time periods, so I'll give a proper review of it later. But on to Darkening Sky, which is really the meat of this season. So like I said, Darkening Sky has several stories for different characters that all take place in the same time period during an eclipse. They kind of make each story... They kind of try to include some rules so that you could run each story with any different type of sort of race, but you really can't. They give some very basic ideas. I don't even see why you would want to, and you would have to change so much. I mean, you might as well just make up your own story because you're going to come up with something way more interesting than what they have. So starting at the beginning is the werewolf story. Basically what it is there's some Mongolians coming in, and then, because the Mongolians invade Eastern Europe around this time period in the real world, so there's some werewolves coming with them, and then your players are supposed to control a group inside of a certain sept that the Mongols kind of want to take control over, and then there are also some black spiral dancers involved. What I came up with to make it more interesting was I had half the party be what the player characters are supposed to be, and then half of the party went with the Mongolians. They were trying to sort of get the regular sept people to swear fealty to their group. And then the original group is trying to avoid having to do that, but still not letting the black spiral dancers take over. This all kind of exploded when one of the players decided that he could get even more experience if he betrayed everyone and joined the black spiral dancers. So he just double-crossed everyone and just kind of raised some hell. And in the end, the Mongolian players were able to put him down after he'd killed, like, I think he killed Adnan's character, and he killed someone else. No, he convinced David's character to join him, and then David's character immediately died. And then his plot kind of blew up in his face, so he died. And that was Miles's character who betrayed everyone. So it was Stallworth and Mary who won that round. As it is, the adventure is pretty dull. It's really not bad. It's just very standard. Black spiral dancers attack. You know, if you've played a werewolf game before, it should be pretty familiar to you. And there's not really that much to set it apart. There's some action in it, and I think they do kind of mention that maybe your players could control the Mongolians instead. Really, if you're gonna run it, even running it seriously, I would still almost suggest dividing up the party, just to give it something that kind of sets it apart. Although, you know, you might want to disallow people just joining the Black Spiral Dancers for no reason. But like I said, we weren't taking these games very seriously. So, next up is the Changelings. So, what this is really almost the worst story of the group. So someone supposedly devises a method to... Because once changelings are baptized, they stop being changelings. It's a whole thing. I've never really played the Dark Ages Fae storyline before, so I'm not that familiar with it. Someone supposedly found out a way to reverse it, but they didn't really. It's actually like a trap that they're trying to set for another changeling that they don't like. And the players are just kind of charged with escorting this... It's really just like a bomb. You've got these supposed changelings who were baptized but turned back into changelings. But really, you're just supposed to escort them into enemy territory, and then they're essentially going to go off. and just ruin everyone's day, like they're gonna screw up changeling magic or something. Really boring. The adventure consists mostly of just traveling from one place to another and meeting random encounters along the way. The way I spiced this up was, I actually had Mary join me as an assistant storyteller for this one. And because the Fae and the Dark Ages are kind of divided into seasonal courts, I told everyone that they were part of the Solstice Court, which, from what I understand, and like I said, I don't play Dark Ages Fae I've never played it before, actually, so I'm not that familiar with it. They're kind of like a neutral court, so everyone was supposed to be part of the Solstice Court, but then I said there would be a double-crosser somewhere in their midst. And then I separately took each player aside and told them they were each from a different seasonal court, and that they were the secret betrayer. But everyone was actually trying to betray everyone, so it got very confusing when everyone was trying to send me secret messages about what they were doing and secret alliances they were posing. In the end, it all blows up. Everyone killed Adnan immediately, because he was the most physically powerful. And it kind of just... David also got taken out pretty quickly after really trying to... He had a bunch of, like, luck-based magic, so he just kept trying to make Stallworth as unlucky as possible. In the end, it kind of came down to a duel between Stallworth and Miles was winning, so Stallworth just took off, because, as I recall, he couldn't take the L, was how he phrased it. So he just ran away, and nothing was really accomplished. As I recall, I think the people they were trying to protect all got killed or something. Or they got captured by someone else. I don't know. They didn't really accomplish much of anything. It was just kind of funny watching them all try and double-cross each other. That was really the only thing that story brought to the table. Number 3 is the Inquisition game. This one, I've read in other reviews, like when I was looking over before I bought Darkening Sky, that this was their favorite of the stories, and I can see that. It actually read as being kind of interesting. Basically, there are like 4 different cases, and your Inquisitors have to go to each one and kind of solve the problems that are going on there, all during this supernatural eclipse. So they're really trying to rush from location to location, and a lot of stuff is building up. I'm not really familiar with Dark Ages Inquisitor either, but just reading through a little bit of stuff and kind of reading through this Darkening Sky story and sort of making up stuff myself, I think the setting is kind of cool. I sort of chose to look at it as sort of like a Dark Ages version of XCOM, where you got like all these terror missions going on, and these guys like are really just trying to rush from location to location, and they're horribly under-equipped for everything they're gonna run into. Like, everything is more badass than they are. So they're really just going in there and just hoping to just wolf pack one enemy at a time and just take them out and hope to get back to the Sky Ranger in one piece. So, you know, that was kind of cool, and there was some betrayal going on there. I didn't even set up teams. I just said, you know, whoever lives at the end, there's a set amount of experience. Whoever lives at the end, that amount of experience gets divided between them. And that was enough. People started betraying each other just so there were fewer people to divide up the experience between at the end. But, yeah, that was a pretty... That one is probably the most interesting of the stories. But, yeah. It's really not enough to make the book worth it. The 4th story is a vampire one, and they used their regular characters for that. It's set in Sevilla, and it's really a pretty generic story about there's a Methuselah that's gonna wake up, and there are Bali that are planning to, like, infuse it with a demon and have it just run havoc, and the players want to stop it. Really, there's nothing bad about it. It's a lot like the werewolf one. It's just kind of standard, and at this point the players had kind of seen... I mean, they'd seen Bali before, they'd seen Methuselahs before, so this wasn't particularly interesting to them. Really, the way I kind of made it interesting was that David had been establishing contacts with his mentor, who had been teaching him abyss mysticism. And I mentioned before he had thought it was the Amicus Noctis that had been sending him. So this was his chance. Well, he was in Iberia, which the Losoma very heavily controlled. He did a lot of politicking, and finally got accepted as a member of the Amicus Noctis. And really the most exciting plot development was that his mentor turned up later and explained that he was not part of the Amicus Noctis, but that he's glad that David is infiltrating them as well, in addition to like the 5 other groups he's infiltrated. And that in reality the group he's with is the Manus Nigrum, or the Black Hand, which is, you know, the sort of ultimate conspiracy in the Dark Ages. And that was also where his sire turned up and revealed that he was really a Borgia as well. That was really the only interesting thing that happened during the adventure. And that really had nothing to do with the adventure itself. That was purely stuff that I came up with. So, but yeah, they did prevent pretty much hell from breaking loose, so that was good. The last story was a mage one, and I had Dragomir kind of go off on his own for this one, with the players essentially controlling just normal Revenant retainers of his. This one is also not very interesting. This one you kind of have to do a lot of work on yourself, and since there's only one mage in the group, I am kind of familiar with Mage the Ascension, although not Dark Ages Mage, so I was kind of at a disadvantage filling in a lot of the gaps myself. So that may have negatively impacted how I perceive this story, but basically, the Holy Roman Emperor is in Jerusalem, and he wants to speak with God personally, so he's having a bunch of mages show up to help devise a ritual to help him do that. Dragomir tried to help, although the ritual ends up going tits up, so basically everything starts exploding, and Dragomir takes it upon himself to try and complete the ritual and speak to God himself, and he goes permanently blind for the trouble, but does survive, and they just kind of shut down the ritual successfully as demons are popping out and things like that. So, that's it. If you know a little bit more about Dark Ages Mage, that one might be kind of interesting to run. It does bring up a lot of stuff, like it refers to like the Emperor in Yellow. I can't remember what the actual title is, but it's something about like the enthronement of the Yellow Emperor or something like that. And that's a book that appears much, much later in in-game time, or it's a little bit earlier out-of-game time. But there was another adventure called The Red Sign, which takes place right before the end of the world, and that was released like back in 2004, before the game line ended. And I kind of liked that book. It was sort of cool and apocalyptic, so I kind of liked the shout-outs to that. But other than that, Darkening Sky, really not worth your time. The fact that they went to the trouble to like go back to an unfinished book from like 2004 and then re-release it in 2014, this is not the product they should have gone back and redone. I mean, it's just really poor. It's just a lot of very generic adventures with one cool Inquisition one, but even then it's really not worth your money, in my opinion. If you're running a Dark Ages Inquisitor game, maybe think about picking it up as a PDF. I can't recommend this one. It's probably well, Clash of Wills is pretty bad too. It's one of the worst Dark Ages books you could get. So, moving on, there was a little bit added on too. This isn't part of Season 4 proper, but it comes in just before when our sessions are going to start again. So there was a lot of downtime. We moved into like the 1300s, so there's about 70 years of downtime after the Darkening Sky stories. So pretty much what happened was Jan went on an adventure and he did find his girlfriend. She had been rescued from France by the Draken, and then the Draken held out to get Stalworth, Jan, that is, Stalworth's character Jan, to blood bond himself to the Draken and swear an oath of fealty before he could get his girlfriend back, which he did end up doing. Let's see, Dragomir was claimed by Yorick. What that means, the players are still uncertain, but right now Dragomir's main intention is he's now using his life magic to physically degrade his body so that he dies of old age before Yorick comes for him, because Yorick also said that Zvezdan had to watch out for Dragomir, and if something happened, Zvezdan was going to get his ass kicked, pretty much. He said it in a more creepy, threatening way, but that was the subtext. So he can't just commit suicide, so he's got to make it look like natural causes. So after that, the weather in Transylvania has been getting worse, and the players believe that the demon cupola is attempting to escape. So they met a Nosferatu named Zelios, the Master Mason, who helped them build their castle back in Season 1. And so they're helping him create a geomantic web that will bind the demon permanently. In order to do that, though, they needed to get to the fortress of Seoris, which is the Tremere stronghold. And in case you haven't noticed, they're not on the best terms with the Tremere. So, since they figured Joshua and Dragomir came to the conclusion that anyone else around would just die if they went to Seoris, so they alone undertook the quest to get there. Around the same time, though, they had gotten a message from Micah Vikos, which is telling them that they are to escort a rogue Tremere named Goratrix to Seoris as their prisoner. So that was the inn that they decided to use to try and get to the fortress. Along the way, they were escorting Goratrix, and they eventually, he did try and convince them to release them, and they were considering it because there were some other prophecies that they were trying to fulfill, and they thought that by bringing Goratrix there they would fulfill them. So they were trying to decide what to do, but the Tremere caught up to them themselves, and that was when Tremere himself personally shows up. And this is from another official adventure in the Transylvania Chronicles, and it's one of my favorites. I'll get to a general review of the Transylvania Chronicles a little bit later. But, yeah, Tremere shows up, and he's pretty... He didn't care much for the Salubri being there. Pretty much the players just kind of assume they're dead at that point, because there's not really anything they could do to fight him. You know, I don't want to spoil too much of what goes down, because even the other players are unfamiliar with what goes down here, so I'll just sum it up as shit goes down and Joshua's dead. So, you can make of that what you will. Dragomir makes it, however, and through some clever bargaining with Etrius, he is brought to the... Etrius is sort of Tremere's right-hand man, by the way. He is brought to Seoris, and he's able to carve the runes, but he's basically promised himself to be embraced into Clan Tremere. He's not really sure. He's going to kind of have to turn against his friends to do this, so he's kind of trying to find a way out. And then all of a sudden, one of Yorick's henchmen in Chiropteran form, which is one of the highest abilities the Tzimisce have, churns up, breaks into the tower, grabs Dragomir, and just runs, because, you know, he's dead if he stays. And so they do manage to escape, and that is where the next session is going to be picking up. At this point, you're pretty much familiar with everything that's happened, so when we start the next session, that's where we'll be picking it up. In terms of reviews, I already reviewed Clash of Wills, and I reviewed Darkening Sky. I didn't really use Iberia by Night, but since the characters did go to Spain, I'm going to take the opportunity to review it here, because it's really the last by Night book that I haven't gone over in the Dark Ages. Iberia by Night is not bad, necessarily. I'd kind of put it with Constantinople by Night, maybe a little bit better. It's not as bad as Jerusalem by Night, in my opinion. Once again, it deals with sort of a region, and there are some interesting ideas to go along with it. Basically, what I would suggest for this one is actually doing something that starts... It really has a lot to do with the Reconquista. If you're not familiar with Spanish history, the Moors invade Spain pretty early on into the sort of medieval period, and then they have control of Spain for quite a while, and then there's a big reconquest of Spain by the Christian kingdoms, and eventually they do succeed in pushing out the Muslim Moors. It gives some pretty cool ideas. It's really about that Reconquista, and it gives some pretty cool ideas for stories that kind of span the length of the Reconquista. And if you're going to do something with Iberia by Night, I'd suggest doing something like that. You know, starting with the Muslim invasion and then working your way all the way through to the end of the Reconquest. You could really tell it from either side. They're kind of options for both Christian and Muslim vampires, so, you know, that's a good thing. Yeah, there's no real adventure that goes along with it. You're kind of left to make up your own story, but I feel like it gives you a little bit more to work with than, say, Jerusalem by Night did. You just got a bigger time period. I guess I kind of like it when you have a long period of time to go with rather than doing a night-by-night sort of chronicle, which is what most city settings are kind of designed for. Here you're kind of traveling around an entire region doing things and kind of taking part in a larger picture. Yeah, it gives a lot of information on the different groups. La Sombra are big in this one. If you like La Sombra, then this is a good book to pick up, because it's just got a lot of information on them, important to La Sombra, and like their groups, what they're doing, because at this point Clan La Sombra is split between Muslims and Christians, so that split is also very heavily important in this book. So, if any of that sort of thing sounds interesting to you, I would recommend Iberia by Night. If it doesn't sound interesting, then I wouldn't recommend it, because it's probably not going to make you interested in it. It's not that good. Yeah, that's it for this. This is the end of my introduction videos. So after this, there will probably just be a weekly session where we just play the game, pretty much. I'm also thinking about maybe doing some more reviews. I don't know, I'll have to see how people like the reviews. You know, Christmas break is coming up, so I need something to fill up the time, so I might make more videos on that. But, yeah, that's it for this set of videos, and when we pick up again, we will be playing the game proper. So I will see you guys then.